Cool. So yeah, we can kind of start things off here. Welcome to the Spotlight Podcast. In this episode, what we're going to do is take a look at our latest State of Global Hotel Pricing Report, so our H1 pricing report. And we actually put out this report last month, but just in case you didn't get a chance to see it and you would just like some brief takeaways, well, that's why I have Blake here with us today to give us some of his top takeaways from this H1 pricing report. So do you want to do a quick little intro, Blake, and say hi to everybody?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name is Blake Ryder. I am the Director of Hospitality Research here at Lighthouse.
Awesome. So if you're ready, let's just go ahead and jump in. And
Right.
I know you mentioned that you had maybe 5 or 6 key takeaways from this H1 pricing report. What was your first takeaway here from
Yeah. And just to be clear, these aren't one better than the other. These are just things that jumped out at me that I thought were interesting, that I thought our listeners might find interesting as well. First, page 4, hotels hit the affordability ceiling. I think here we're really talking about how the savings that people had kind of accumulated and backlogged from the pandemic and that lack of travel during that time. Those savings have kind of dwindled, and coupled with this inflationary environment, consumer goods, they're at peak pricing, interest rates are where they are. It's an interesting time when this affordability concern is definitely real. Preferences are shifting towards non-hotel accommodations. So those short-term rentals are posing a real challenge, in the side of your typical hotel, accommodations. And there's also, like we say, an increased emphasis on finding deals. So that's kind of where the hotel pricing, what the state of affairs, I should say, is in hotel pricing. So I found that to be interesting. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that you just said there. And one thing that I think is interesting to point out too is if you do download this H1 pricing report, we have some hyperlinks in here, so you can actually see what Blake is talking about. So when you mentioned that savings have dwindled, if you click on that first link, you'll actually be able to see, and I'll put it up on the screen here, but the rate of savings has really, really dropped since the pandemic. There were some months in the pandemic where, the average American was saving like 20-30% of their income, which of course had to do with like stimulus checks, which we know. And now the effect of that is, it's come and gone now, right? We're several years past that. So that kind of ties in with that first point that you made. Also to that second link where we have that hyperlink there where preferences are shifting. That's definitely worth looking at as well, because that report really breaks it down in an interesting way where it's looking at low-income travelers, medium-income travelers, and then high-income travelers. And it's more so the lower-income travelers that are really feeling the pinch. They're not traveling as much. And the growth in those travel budgets is more so coming from that higher-income traveler.
Yeah.
So you're still seeing some strength from spend in travelers, but again, it's coming from more so like that higher income traveler. So
yeah, and I think that the numbers in pricing really kind of corroborate what we're saying. If you look at Europe, 3% year-over-year increase in H1 pricing, and H2 pricing is actually down 2% advertised rates compared to the second half of 2023 actualized. If you look at North America, pricing in the first half of 2024 was down 0.3% year-over-year, and if you consider inflation, that's actually about a 2% decrease roughly. H2, we're talking nominal 2% year-over-year increase in advertised versus actualized of the prior year, so ostensibly flat in real terms. It all kind of comes through in the pricing as well.
Cool. Well, let's keep it moving here and talk about your second point that you had from the H1 pricing report, Blake. What was the second thing that you found interesting?
Yeah, I think it was Latin America on page 5, just leading all regions in 2024 pricing. At this point, obviously through the first half, we're talking H1 pricing of 269, that is US dollars, and that leads all Lighthouse defined regions. That's actually a 25% year-over-year increase, and that's actually a 35% jump during the peak February and early March months as well. Looking forward to the second half of 2024, advertised rates are up 19% year over year in the second half. That's advertised versus actualized of 2023. So I found that super interesting to see Latin America just performing how strongly it has been.
Yeah, I thought that was also a pretty big surprise. And there's a link there where you can read really interesting story where a lot of this growth is kind of being pushed forward by the fact that a lot of these economies in LATAM are growing. So if you read that report, there's this really cool country breakdown where you can see trends to watch in Brazil and Mexico, Chile and Colombia. And right now, all of those economies are forecast to grow. So it's a pretty bullish indicator of why we're seeing so much growth in this particular region.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So what you got for your third interesting finding here from the H1 pricing report?
Yeah, so next page, the APAC region. So just kind of general cautious optimism. And I know we'll kind of speak a little bit about this at various junctures, but last 3 years really characterized by consumer hesitancy, poor pricing performance in key economies like China, Japan, Thailand. And then if you look down, pricing was down 0.6% in H1 year over year, but they're really pushing the advertised rates up 15% year over year in the second half of 24 relative to that second half of 2023 actualized. So there's a bit of cautious optimism. We know how much of this region really relies on outbound Chinese tourism, Chinese travel. So some cautious optimism that might start to return, as you can see in the pricing for the second half advertised versus what happened in the first half actualized, how there's some pricing recovery. So cautious optimism in that APAC region.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little bit too, Blake, is if you check out this kind of supplementary link that we have here, I think one of the big reasons why we're saying, a tale of cautious optimism is it's really going to depend on what that Chinese traveler does, right? Because in years past, they were traveling all over the world, didn't have any real visa issues or anything like that. So they were going to Singapore, they were going to Japan and other international destinations. And now that traveler is probably a little bit more apt to just stay within mainland China. So they're going to domestic destinations essentially. So yeah, just to add a little something onto that one as well. So what do you have? I think we're now on point number 4. What was your fourth point that you wanted to call out here from the H1 pricing report?
Yeah, I thought the sun and sand destinations kind of being the new, kind of reigning supreme through the first half of 2024, breaking that trend of those cultural cities. That was the trend that we were seeing in H2 of 2023. Now kind of shifting back to that leisure, the sun and sand being, hot spots for price growth, the central Mediterranean, Mexico, Colombia, the southern Thai beach destinations. This just jumped out at me as a obviously we know travel, cyclical, ups, downs constantly. And, to kind of see that shift from the cultural cities back to the traditional sun and sand type locations.
Cool. And yeah, let's actually look at that list here. So I'll move forward a page as well. And here are some of those markets with a year-over-year change in actualized lowest price. So this is from the first half of last year to the first half of this year. Chennai is leading the list, rounded out with Riyadh and Monterey in the top 3. But again, the vast majority of these cities here, sun and sand, definitely seeing that trend worldwide. All right. And what else do you have for us here? We're now on point number 5. Blake, is there a certain slide you want me to go to?
Yeah, that was actually a good segue. Page 9, just kind of talking about Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia being the second fastest growing destination, as you just showed on the previous slide, second only to Chennai. Chennai being a 36% on the coast, sun and sand, just like we're talking about. But then we look at Riyadh, it's second fastest. And what's interesting here is that the Middle East otherwise is fairly subdued or negative. If you look at page 7, you could see Middle East actually being negative largely for the H1 actualized and H2 advertised pricing. So just seeing Riyadh kind of breaking that mold jumped out at me quite a bit. And as we mentioned in the report, really driven by investment in high profile sporting events, particularly combat sports. I found that to be very interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah. So they had what? They had like you can see how much I know about like combat sports, right? What's the one where they're in the octagon and there's blood
UFC?
everywhere and they're UFC. There we go. Yeah. I think they had like a WWE and a UFC event in Riyadh, right?
They had WWE was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. I did not know that.
I think so. Let's Google it. Okay. Over the last year, Saudi Arabia has started to supplant Las Vegas and London as the leading hub of combat sports, with major boxing fights now routinely taking place there and UFC visiting for the first time in June. Okay. So it looks like it was boxing and UFC. Okay.
I
Cool.
don't know. I don't know if WWE does that count as a combat sport or more as a combat performance?
Theater. Yeah. A
Theater, right? Theater.
theater
Maybe
performance.
I don't know. That's a debate for another time.
All right. And then I think we're now getting to your final point that you wanted to call out here from the H1 pricing report, Blake. So do you have a specific slide you want us to look at and a topic to talk about?
Yeah, page 12. Just to go back to the Asian markets again, 12 of the destinations with the steepest actualized year-over-year declines in H124 versus H123. And then 8 of the weakest growth markets in terms of advertised pricing for H224 versus actualized H223. I found this, to see this many low growth markets kind of in such concentration, concentrated in Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia overall. Again, historically reliant on Chinese tourism, which we know is slow to return. Thailand and Japan, they really are relying on those Chinese tourists to bolster their economy. Cities like Bangkok, Hanoi, Seoul, they experienced some year-over-year growth in H1, but your smaller, less connected cities are underperforming. And really that full recovery to 2019 levels is going to be dependent on the Chinese travelers booking more outbound travel and accessing those second-tier locations.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that as well, if we actually jump forward to the next page, we actually kind of cover this in detail too. So we talk about the Japan paradox. We also talk about some of these other markets that you just mentioned, Blake, like Southeast Asia and Korea trends, and we offer some key takeaways there as well. But to kind of go through that list of cities, also on the page right now, we have this list of year-over-year change in actualized lowest price. So this is from the first half of 2023 to the first half of 2024. These are all of the cities that are experiencing that biggest drop-off in pricing. So Hoi An, the Seychelles, Gangwon province in South Korea are that top 3. But there's also a lot of those secondary markets on this list as well. If you download the H1 pricing report, that you'll be able to see. Cool. So I think that is, for the most part, that's going to be a wrap, unless we have anything else that we want to add here to the H1 pricing report. If you haven't downloaded it yet, I strongly recommend that you do. It's a really pretty report, first of all. The design team did an awesome job with it, but there's a lot of other really cool supplementary stuff in there. So a lot of the other research papers and stuff like that I mentioned, they're all linked in that PDF, and they're really, really easy to find. So a lot of really good data in there if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about pricing in the first half of the year. So anything else to add, Blake, before we call it a day?
No, that was great. Appreciate you guys tuning in and checking out the report. Hopefully you enjoy geeking out on data as much as we do.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.